On a peaceful evening of the 19th of October 2004, Keysha Brown, a 28-year-old mother, was found dead in her Las Vegas residence. She had been the victim of physical abuse and assault. Because of scant evidence and no apparent suspect, the investigating officers reached a dead end. Despite the fact that the case subsequently went cold, investigators hadn't forgotten Keysha. A few years later, there was a renewed focus on finding her killer, and DNA evidence shed new light on the case. Who was this vicious murderer then? Likewise, what drove them to commit this murder, and why? Las Vegas is a vibrant city that never rests. In Nevada, Las Vegas has the largest population. With its well-known casinos, excellent performances, and exciting nightlife, it's no wonder that this city has developed into a haven for those seeking pleasure. Behind the charm and splinters, though, is an interesting history. From its early days as a refuge for showgirls and gangsters to its present status as an epicenter of global entertainment. Within this intriguing city was a disturbing homicide case under investigation. In the middle of the 1970s, Keysha Brown was born. About her formative years, not much is known, such as her schooling, parents' names, or if she was an only child. What's known is that in the year 2004, she was a young mother living in a small apartment on the bustling East Flamingo Road, along with her daughter named Kalia. Being the world's happiest and proudest mother, she would stop at nothing to ensure that her child, Kalia, had a better quality of life. Furthermore, it's unclear precisely what Keysha did to support her daughter and herself. She was a survivor. She was a woman who refused to bow to the obligations of life. At the time, Keysha was also seeing a man. He was simply called as her boyfriend, and it's still unclear how he was acquainted with Kalia. For those who were familiar with Keysha, what transpired on the 19th of October 2004 would continue to haunt their memories. Witnesses alleged to have seen a stranger arrive in a red sedan outside her apartment on that Tuesday. No one knew who he was or what he was up to, but he rushed into Keysha's apartment. Keysha's daughter Kalia wasn't there and had left the residence safely, albeit it's not clear where she was during that time. After spending a few minutes inside, the man came out while holding a duffel bag. Just in no time, he returned to his red sedan, started it, and drove off into the night, leaving a trail of rumors in his wake. Those who saw him afterwards would characterize him as a robust black guy. 7 minutes before 7 o'clock, Keysha's boyfriend showed up at her apartment, excited to meet her. But when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He scowled as he attempted to turn the doorknob. Unexpectedly, he found it easier to turn than usual. Feeling a sensation of anxiety, he pushed open the door and went into the apartment. He called out for Keysha but got no response, as his voice echoed through the empty apartment. At this moment, his panic began to escalate with every second that went by. He walked throughout the apartment, peeping into each corner. Nevertheless, he eventually discovered her in the bathroom, where her lifeless body was lying in the bathtub and covered by a pile of garments. He had an abrupt realization that something was seriously wrong. As he leant in closer, he realized that she had stopped breathing and was not moving. He spotted blood as well, which led him to assume that she had been stabbed. He checked for a pulse, but there was none. Keysha's boyfriend felt his heart accelerate as soon as he realized the gravity of the situation. Realizing that he had to act fast to have any chance at saving her, he set off an alarm. His scream for aid was heard by the concerned neighbors, who soon swarmed the apartment. The moments that followed were an upsurge of chaos and confusion, as multiple people hastily dialed the emergency number to report what had happened. It felt as though time stood still while they awaited medical aid. Officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department rushed to the apartment as soon as they received word about the incident at 7:13 p.m. Paramedics arrived at the scene and joined them, yet it was already too late. Keysha had passed away. She was gently transported from the residence, and an autopsy was performed on her body. As soon as they arrive at the crime site, detectives realize they are up against an intimidating challenge. They gathered and preserved DNA evidence from the scene with extreme caution, believing that it might contain the answer to unraveling the mystery. They then began questioning everyone else who might have seen or heard anything, including Keysha's boyfriend. During one of these interviews, they first learned about the anonymous male in the red sedan who had been spotted by witnesses visiting Keysha's residence. Despite having merely a vague description of the man's appearance, the investigators were unable to rule out the likelihood that he was Keysha's killer. No one had an up-close view of him, and there was no close-by surveillance cameras footage that may have been used to identify him. But the cops were relentless. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and spoke with anyone who could have information about what had happened to Keysha. They knew that any lead, no matter how small, might hold the missing piece to solving the puzzle. Keysha's autopsy results were promptly released to the public, and they were extremely disturbing. The Clark County Coroner's Office revealed her cause of death to be strangulation. In addition, Keysha had been battered, stabbed, and assaulted, according to the autopsy findings. The news struck shockwaves across the neighborhood as locals tried to grasp the severity of the crime. For Keysha's sake, law enforcement kept looking for the perpetrator and did everything in their position to get her justice. As they worked day and night to solve the case, the investigators couldn't help but wonder who the mysterious man was and did he had any connection to Keysha's tragic demise. Despite the investigators' tireless efforts, Keysha's family was left to grieve her death and struggle with the knowledge that somebody had viciously stolen her life. The case eventually went cold. However, Keysha's unresolved case was given a second shot after years of stagnation when it was turned over to the Homicide Cold Case Unit of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. On the August of 2022, the department decided to revisit the case, and some of the most experienced investigators were assigned to it. While the team began to look through the details of the case, Detective Dan Long discovered a new lead that previously went unnoticed. Looking at a few of the cases he investigated back in 2005, he observed a pattern. Detective Dan had once worked on a case including 3 young women who had been murdered in separate, unrelated incidents. Each of the 3 women was slain in a similar manner, and their bodies had all been discarded in similar ways. The killer in all 3 incidents was a man by the name of Norman Flowers, who was currently incarcerated on 3 life terms. Norman's criminal history was a horrific and graphic depiction of dread. In the first few months of 2005, he began a burglary spree that eventually led to brutal assaults. His first known victim was Sheila Quarles, the 18-year-old daughter of his ex-girlfriend, Deborah Quarles. Norman had been imprisoned for over a decade and was granted 2 paroles. Following his most recent parole, it roughly took him 20 days to murder Sheila. On March 24, 2005, he broke into Sheila's residence and battered her severely. He first brutally attacked her before strangling her to death. Next, acting in a psychopathic manner, he left her body face up into the bathtub steaming hot water. Before he fled, he stole her mobile phone, credit card, and jewelry. Throughout the days that followed, Norman acted as a grieving ex-boyfriend who comforted Deborah, even suggesting that she seek counseling. Deborah was blind to the knowledge that the monster who took her daughter's life was in front of her at the moment. On May 4, 2005, more than a month after the first murder, Norman Flowers got back on his murderous rampage. This time, in a duration of barely 8 hours, he attacked 2 women. He started by breaking into the residence of 45-year-old Marilee Coote, who had the unfortunate encounter with the insane offender. She was beaten, assaulted, and then strangled to death. Despite the murder, Norman was not done. As the hours went by, he proceeded to the residence of 25-year-old Rena Gonzalez. Rena, like Marilee, was helpless against the ferocity of Norman's violence. Norman attacked her and strangled her to death with a telephone wire. When Norman was interviewed by law enforcement a few days later, he firmly denied having anything to do with the dreadful crimes, but his lies were exposed by the credibility of the forensic evidence. Because of DNA found on Marilee's body, authorities were able to catch him. On June 6, 2005, he was arrested and charged with Marilee's murder, marking an end to his reign of terror. Because of the strength of the evidence incriminating Norman, investigators were able to establish a connection between him and the two killings. 2008 saw Norman facing trial for Sheila's murder. While the prosecution sought the death penalty against Norman, his family pleaded with the jury to spare his life. Despite the testimony of Norman's family, the jury ruled him as guilty and condemned him to a life term in prison without any possibility of release. In August 2011, he received 2 further life sentences for the killings of Rena and Marilee. Detective Dan felt his heartbeat elevate as he examined the details of Norman's horrific murders. He had an instinct that this individual was connected in some way to Keysha's unresolved murder. He was aware that he would require DNA testing in order to make an arrest, as it was the only way to confirm his suspicions. Detective Dan promptly bagged up and transferred the evidence from Keysha's case to the DNA lab. He was impatient to hear the results. His motivation sprang from the desire to bring Keysha's family some closure after so many years. The evidence that was sent in for testing has not been made available to the general public. As the days stretched into weeks, Detective Dan and his team got increasingly restless. They knew that apprehending Keysha's killer was crucial to maintaining their own mental well-being as well as achieving justice. They eventually got the call they had been waiting for on December 21, 2022. The results were evident and undeniable. Norman's DNA was matched to the evidence from Keysha's case. It took them years to find their man, and when they did, it was hard to accept that he had been there right in front of them this whole time. The evidence rendered it clear that Keysha was indeed Norman's 4th victim. After that, the investigating officers started on formulating a plan to prosecute Norman for the murder. It didn't take long for them to find him, given that he was already serving 3 life sentences at Nevada's High Desert State Prison. On February 23, 2023, the detective acquired an arrest warrant for Norman. The charges brought against him were serious, which included break-ins with a deadly weapon, sexual assault, and open murder. Norman was to be held answerable for the crimes he committed against Keysha, no matter where he was, according to the police. As news of Norman's arrest circulated, a police briefing was held that same day. Keysha's daughter, Kalia, who had been invited, arrived with a mournful demeanor. She was visibly distressed and had tears streaming down her cheeks as she thanked the law enforcement for providing her with a sensation of closure. Keysha's murder serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the potential threats in our community. Detective Dan and his team's unrelenting dedication to seeking justice provided Keysha's loved one with some comfort, despite the devastating loss. To avoid tragedies like this from happening in the first place, the case also highlights issues with our judicial system's deficiencies and the necessity of improved preventative and rehabilitation initiatives. In 1994, Lillian DeCloe, then 89 years old, resided in Broward County, Florida. She struggled with medical issues such as memory loss. Lillian was looked after by her niece, June Nicholas. The late afternoon of 29th of April, 1994, June went to her aunt's house. She walked inside the first bedroom, where Lillian typically used to rest. When June got to the end of the hall, she turned to look to her right and saw Lillian's body there lying on the floor. She'd been viciously battered and strangled. Investigators concluded that the perpetrator most likely came in through the bedroom window. Upon noticing that the house had been vandalized, they assumed Lillian wasn't intentionally targeted, but instead it was a burglary gone south. From the crime site, investigators brought in a number of items in the hopes that they may come in handy later. In 2004, after Lillian's nightgown was re-examined, the Broward County Sheriff's Office discovered that male DNA was present on it. In 2019, the cold case team of the Broward County Sheriff's Office revisited her case in an attempt to learn more about the former teacher and nurse. They did this by utilizing DNA databases and previous case files. As a result of their efforts, they ultimately came across Johnny Mack Brown. He used to reside a few houses away from Lillian and has been a former U.S. Marine. His relatives informed detectives that he suffered from drug addiction and PTSD, and as a result, ended up being homeless for a handful of years. In 2010, he passed away from natural causes. In August 2022, detectives gathered a court warrant to exhume Brown's body from the Palm Beach County, South Florida National Cemetery. The DNA found on Lillian's nightgown was consistent with Brown's, according to tests conducted at the crime lab of the Broward County Sheriff's Office. In fact, the Sheriff's Office stated that the DNA test results showed 66.8 trillion times higher likelihood of having originated from Brown than from someone else. The Broward State Attorney's Office declares the case is now closed after accepting the conclusion that Johnny Mack Brown was behind the murder of Lillian. Following the public announcement regarding the killer's identity in 2023, June Nicholas commented this: "I know that wherever she is, she can now rest in peace. We are glad that this is closed. We can move on. We are at ease now since we are certain that the case was not left unresolved." June also remembers how she felt when she discovered Lillian's body. "You know, I gave Auntie a call. How are you doing? I took glance inside the first bedroom where she usually napped and then headed down to the end of the hall where I noticed her lying on the floor." According to Nicholas, she was greatly impacted by the brutality against her aunt. "In order to recover, I took a whole year off from work. I couldn't handle it, so for several months I had someone else look after my kids. It really was that awful. Whenever I lay in my bed, I would see her on the floor." In a courthouse in Allegan County on Wednesday, 72 years old Dennis Bowman entered a plea of not guilty to the murder of his 14-year-old adopted daughter Aundria Bowman over 30 years ago. Early in 2020, Aundria's body, which had been missing since March 1989, was discovered in the backyard of Bowman's Hamilton residence. Later that year, Bowman was convicted for her murder. A jury trial was scheduled for early January, but on Wednesday, Bowman entered a not guilty plea to second-degree murder, a charge that carries a possible penalty of life in prison. In terms of sentencing, a no-contest plea carries the same consequences as a guilty plea, despite not admitting to guilt. In connection with a 1980 rape and murder of a 25-year-old woman in Norfolk, Virginia, Bowman is already serving 2 life sentences. The case remained unsolved for several decades preceding Bowman's 2019 arrest. Based on what he told to the authorities, Bowman claimed that when he returned to the house, south of Holland, where he and his wife Brenda lived, he discovered Aundria preparing a bag to run away. Aundria threatened to report that Bowman had sexually abused her. As per the case details read aloud during the hearing on Wednesday, the two got into an argument, and Bowman punched her, causing her to fall down the stairs. Aundria's neck was broken from the fall, and she passed away. After that, Bowman carried her body outside to a barn, set fire to her clothing and bag, and hid her body under a tarp. He reported to the police that day that Aundria had stolen $100 from the couple and fled the house. He later chopped off her legs with an axe so her body could fit in a barrel which he buried and reburied when they relocated to Hamilton. Bowman claimed in a confession letter dated November 7, 2019, "I have confessed to the death of Aundria. I myself and no one else. I hit her during an argument with her, causing her to stumble back, and fell down the steep stairs of the rental home we lived in between Holland and Hamilton. I hid the body and disposed of it a few days later, out of fear of serving more time in prison and losing my loved ones. I had kept it to myself for all these years, so that I could live with Brenda and watch Vanessa blossom into a prosperous young woman. With all of my heart, I beg you to stand by Brenda, as I have caused her pain and betrayed her." When Bowman was being held in the Allegan County Jail following his arrest for the murder in Norfolk, Virginia, he confessed to hiding Aundria's body. He revealed to Brenda where Aundria was buried on the property and acknowledged that he was to blame for her demise in a recorded phone conversation with his wife from the jail. The couple had adopted Aundria, whose birth name was Alexis Badger. When Alexis was a teenager, her biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, placed her for adoption in the state of Virginia. Turkanian participated in the search for Aundria's remains. Upon discovering that Bowman had a history of abusing women, was increasingly certain, even years before his arrest, that Bowman was responsible for her passing. Authorities claim he was involved in the rape of a 27-year-old in 1979, the attempted rape of a 19-year-old in 1980, and the abduction and sexual assault of a 6-year-old girl in 1989 close to Holland. Myrene Koch, the prosecutor for Allegan County, intends to invite other victims of his crimes to testify during the trial. Aundria's childhood friend, whom she had accused Bowman of raping, was also on the prosecution's witness list. 29-year-old Nona Stamey Cobb's body was discovered by the authorities on the side of the highway in 1992. She had been strangled to death. Cobb was last seen during the night on July 6, 1992, at the Cleveland County Welcome Center on Interstate 85, getting into a pickup driven by an unidentifiable man. On July 7th, at around 6:15 a.m., her body was found dumped on the northbound side of Interstate 77 in Surry County. 3 years later, investigators allegedly found their first suspect when Ashboro truck driver Sean Patrick Goebel was interrogated by Surry County Sheriff's Office deputies regarding the case. Goebel, however, purportedly denied any role in Cobb's demise. He was later found guilty of killing 3 more women and received 2 life sentences in addition to a 14-year prison term. Nevertheless, in July 1995, Goebel was reportedly ruled out as a suspect in Cobb's death, based on DNA recovered from semen that was found on her body. As a result, police were left without a person of interest in the case for decades to come. The physical evidence gathered at the crime scene, which includes the DNA discovered on Cobb's body, was re-examined in April 2021 by special agents from the SBI's Cold Case Investigation Unit and investigators from the Sheriff's Office. Through a comparison of Alexander's DNA profile with that of Cobb's body, investigators were able to identify Alexander as a potential suspect. In May 2022, Alexander was taken into custody by members of the Diamond Head Police Department in Mississippi. He is presently being held in the Hancock County Jail, according to online jail records, while he waits to be extradited back to North Carolina to face the murder charge. When Cobb passed away in 1992, her sister Vicki Gregory supposedly informed the Journal that, although Cobb had a drug problem at the time of her passing, she loved her family, especially her 3-year-old son Josh. "We all loved her, and she loved us back." Gregory supposedly said in 1992, "Just because you do something wrong doesn't mean you stop loving her." Josh was dear to her. She was rather proud of him. About 7 months prior to her passing, Cobb, a widow, supposedly lost custody of her son. Gregory, who was supposedly housing the youngster, mentioned that Cobb called almost daily to ask about him. The SBI highlighted that the inquiry into Alexander is still ongoing, and that investigators are considering the probability that there could be additional victims. Albert Woolfolk is a native of Columbus, and his family acknowledges something that not many people have to deal with: the heartbreaking pursuit for the truth about a loved one's unsolved murder. As Frances, Woolfolk's wife, thought back on the years she had spent looking for justice and answers, she remarked, "It's been very, very hard. It's been 17 years, yet you still have to deal with it every day. Though you strive to move forward every day, you never forget it." Woolfolk's brother, Gene, is likewise plagued by the unanswered mystery that haunts his family all the time. Every day you have to deal with the fact that your brother was killed by someone, and that person is still at large, unpunished, and has not taken responsibility for his actions, said Gene Woolfolk. Ensuring that someone is held accountable for this act is our primary goal. The 45-year-old father of four was found slain inside his Haversham Avenue house on July 18, 2003. Detective Stuart Carter, a retired Columbus Police Department officer who came back to work part-time for the department in order to dedicate his entire attention to unresolved murder cases, stated that after family members had entered the house, they had found his lifeless body. It was obvious that he had been murdered. Carter declared, "There's no doubt that he died inside the house." Although the manner of Woolfolk's murder has not been made public, Columbus police have reported that it was an atrocious crime, along with sharing some fresh information that the investigators believe will lead to new leads. They are discussing the timeline and circumstances encompassing his last known moments. We firmly think that Mr. Detective Carter concluded that although Woolfolk was not officially found dead until July 18, 2003, he was most likely murdered in the early hours of July 17. Woolfolk was last seen alive on the evening of July 16, 2003, according to detectives. Witnesses claim to have seen him leaving the now-closed Coach's Corner Sports Cafe. However, the establishment was situated at 3709 Gentian Boulevard in the shopping mall in 2003. Detective Carter stated that he was observed driving his silver Jaguar convertible out of the parking lot. However, Detective Carter said that Woolfolk did not exit the cafe alone. Witnesses report that when he left that evening, he was accompanied by one white male and two African-American men. Although authorities make it apparent that these individuals are not necessarily to blame for Woolfolk's murder, they nonetheless intend to track them down so they can question them. The increased information that detectives have gathered about the white individual, whom they have labeled a person of interest, represents a promising lead. According to accounts from 2003, he was in the age range of 25 to 28. He would thus be in his mid-40s at this point. Other distinguishing traits might be, he had a medium physique and stood between 5 and 6 feet tall. He liked to play pool, so in addition to Coach's, he would also go to the Red Ryder Lounge. Following that, he would go to the same shopping mall on Gentian's Boulevard as Coach's and Scooters, which used to be on Sidney Simon Boulevard. Since then, every single one of those establishments has closed. The Caucasian man, according to the police, was either bald or had his hair cropped in a military way. They also mentioned that he drank a whole lot. However, these are not the only things that police have discovered. Detective Carter claimed that when he got drunk, he turned into an extremely aggressive person. Detective Carter requests that anyone who used Coaches, Red Ryders, or Scooters frequently in 2003 attempt to remember if any of these attributes remind them of somebody. If so, they ought to get in touch with him. He emphasizes that even if someone believes their memories are unimportant, they could include information that is crucial to the investigation. Detective Carter continues, "This year, the case has gained momentum. Witnesses have provided the police with fresh information, and some things are undergoing DNA processing. The Woolfolk family claims that after years of waiting, they are comforted by the knowledge that justice may yet be served. Francis Woolfolk once said, 'I pray every night that someone will come forward and be able to solve this for us.' Gene, Woolfolk's brother, makes every effort to carry on the family's legal battle for justice. He is in charge of a Facebook page that aims to maintain awareness of the unsolved homicide. In December 2020, investigators acquired a warrant for Alvin Shane Barfield's arrest. In Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, he was taken into custody. The information that prompted detectives to consider Barfield as a suspect and eventually file charges against him was not disclosed by Columbus Chief of Police Freddie Blackman. According to Amy Prock, the Chief of Police of Myrtle Beach, our persistent collaborations with federal, state, and local agencies have led to fantastic outcomes yet again. Because of the diligence and commitment of the police in South Carolina and Georgia, our community is much safer today, and Mr. Barfield will be held responsible for his acts. As he awaits extradition to Columbus, Barfield is being detained at the J. Reuben Long Detention Center in Conway, South Carolina. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of unsolved cases.